Malcolm Gladwell, many of you will be familiar with, and James Surowski, the Wisdom of Crowds, would say consumers don't always behave the way that you expect them to. I think one example in my experience is that I was very interested in electronic payment systems pretty early on because I saw them as a way, at the time it was considered a new thought, now it's kind of passé, but a new way to transact online. And transact, for me, was much more exciting when I thought about all of the different applications around content, so creating new environments where people could actually experience content in an entirely new way. And so when I was interested in learning more about electronic payment systems, I looked first to the financial services industries, specifically around credit cards. And while at the time, credit cards, credit card companies, the banks didn't even have marketing websites with a URL, just even a basic URL homepage. I thought it was important to understand how this worked. And one of the companies that I became really interested in early on, again, not from the financial services standpoint, but really in terms of the human behavior side of things in electronic payment systems, was Capital One. Now, Capital One was, at the time, a pretty small company, and it was formed by a British psychologist, an Englishman, and an American businessman. And essentially what they did is they started analyzing the behavior of people who were using credit cards. And what they found out is basically how credit cards worked, and this was in the very, very early 80s, primarily in the U.S., is that they would develop a profile and try to understand who an individual was and market to them and try to sell them the best product in terms of the credit card that they would make available. But oftentimes people didn't pay their bills on time, and so essentially what happened is you'd have several boxes that people would go into. So people who were 30 days late in paying their bill off, people who would pay the minimum but they wouldn't pay the whole bill, the people who would take 60 days, 90 days, etc. And what happened is essentially it's very basic, but people would get put to the next box. So if you didn't pay in 30 days, you then got put into the 60-day box. If you didn't pay in 60 days, you got put to the 90-day box. And it just kind of continued as a cycle. And what the founders of Capital One started to analyze is, are there certain people who are just never going to pay beyond a certain point? Or are there certain people who will pay at 90 days, but they won't pay if they don't have the money, or if their situation changes, they won't pay beyond that. There's some very interesting dynamics that they looked at in terms of human behavior. So what they decided is that for certain people, they would profile them in a different way. They would understand, and then some of those people just wouldn't get put into those other boxes. And what that meant is serious cost savings in terms of the administrative costs in putting those people through that normal kind of credit card cycle. And it also meant that they were able to sell better products to those individual customers. Now, I'm not even a credit card advocate, and I don't have a Capital One card, but I found that experience enormously fascinating. And I remember when I was asked to come over here to set up Capital One in the UK, we were told quite clearly by everyone that we met, Brits change their credit cards less often than they change their spouses, so just forget about it. So it was a really interesting experience to not only start to understand how human behavior transcends geography, but how human behavior transcends technology limitations, because at the time there were no real robust ways to have a consumer-facing online transactional service. So I'd say, in that sense, the strategic serendipity came out of really analyzing the behavior. So I'd say sometimes interpretation and application of the discovery is really what drives the strategic serendipity. So for example, I think another good one is denim. So denim was originally created for the pioneers in the west of the U.S. to create tents. So they actually stayed in tents made out of denim. And if any of you are music festival goers, if you can imagine being in the hot, steamy tent of denim, it's just awful. But what they started to understand is that that a lot of the cowboys were going through their clothes quite quickly and started to use denim for jeans, and Levi's was born. I think there are some other obvious examples in SMS messaging. I'm assuming most of you guys understand, the history of what's been involved in terms of the evolution of SMS messaging, but initially, certainly, it wasn't driven by what consumers want. It was driven by what technology could make available. And then through experimentation and through actual human behavior, we started to see an entirely new industry evolve, and certainly one of the most profitable streams for the mobile network operators. So how does that really apply to Web 2.0, whether or not you like that phrase or not? I think that in terms of the speed at which everything is changing throughout internet and technology-based businesses, I think that there are certainly a number of things in flux, and it makes creating a strategy or prioritizing incredibly difficult. I think one of the things that we have to be really cognizant of is, when they were creating the well early on, I certainly don't think that they had planned out the early beginnings of a MySpace, Facebook, or Bebo, for example. But the strategy around what to provide people and the essentials of communication were certainly there. And I think it was just a few days ago that Vince Cerf said that we've probably only invented about 1% of the things that the web is capable of. So I think that's the challenge to all of us here today. At Bebo, I'll give you a couple of examples of where I see strategy kind of colliding with these kind of happy accidents. And that is when I arrived just a couple of months ago at Bebo, their strategy was a video-centric strategy. So, get the kind of communication side of the platform working incredibly well. That was working. Okay, next part of the strategy is making it incredibly rich in terms of video content. So they were looking at massive licensing deals to bring in the right kind of content, short-form content, but video content that would sit in a channel environment in Bebo TV. The thing that they were assuming is that people would watch the video. So I think that's a fair assumption, but what we've learned by assessing user behavior is that people are actually using video and music not to consume it because they've either seen it or heard it elsewhere, but they're using it to express themselves. They're using it as a personal branding exercise. And so what we're doing now is developing all the applications, tools, assets, and bringing the right kind of content in so that people can use it for the reason that they want to use it. So to sum up, I think we've seen lots of examples in the music industry of where they've followed a strategy to become more profitable, and what we've seen is that a company comes in, and in their desire to sell hardware, they actually fundamentally change online purchase of music. So iTunes, was part of a strategy for Apple's to sell more hardware. And what they've done is they've helped sustain the music industry during a really, really difficult time. So I think that when we're looking at our own businesses, the own products, I would say now more than ever, the speed at which change is taking place is important to honestly acknowledge your core competencies and set priorities that allow you to create and execute a strategy which provides inspiration and focus with limited resources. However, I would also say that it's vital to allow enough flexibility and space for organic innovation to evolve and erupt. Follow your strategy, but constantly analyze user behavior to anticipate needs and map those against industry changes, dynamics, and trends. If you notice something unexpected, seize it, fan the flame. If there's enough momentum to develop it into a fire, really feed that fire and accommodate the strategy based on what you've learned. If you're watching something close enough, you might just realize you've stumbled across a happy accident or strategic serendipity that could change the way that we use the internet forever. And I think everyone in here is capable of trying to create that kind of change. I think we all aspire to do it. You can always claim afterwards, as I'm sure sometimes we often do, that when you're getting your award, when you're making your millions, when you fundamentally change the way people participate and interact online, that you meant it all along. Thank you.